Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Turning Towards Life on this Sunday morning in London, where Justin and I are, and maybe you're listening very far afield from us, and also maybe you're listening at a different time. If you're here with us live, it's wonderful that you get to show us that you're here through the live thing. If people listen on our podcast, we don't often know who is listening. So it's a lovely thing if anybody's listening live, and also it's very lovely to wonder about people listening on the podcast on their way to work or doing various things at different times. So everyone is very, very welcome, and we're really happy to be here. Sorry we're a little bit late. I had to do an emergency feeding scenario with baby Vespa, and so I was a little bit late and managed to grab a shower and miraculously got down here, but still we're at just past 9 o'clock. And sorry if that means anybody has been sitting around waiting for us. And hopefully it's worth the wait with this beautiful sauce that Justin's brought us about fire, which I'm really delighted to be able to talk about today. So yeah, just welcome everybody, and we're really happy to get stuck into this lovely sauce. And I'm sure Justin's going to tell us a little bit more about how come you chose it and what the origins of this choice are as well.
I will. Good morning, everybody. I am, as always, super pleased to be here and super pleased to see you, Lizzie. And a couple of things are on my mind. I've had some very beautiful conversations with people this week who've been affected and supported by this conversation we're having. Lizzie and I wanted to just remark on that. It's nothing short of miraculous to me that anybody else finds this useful in the way that they do, and glorious and wonderful. So really pleased about that. And the other thing you and I were just doing before we came on, Lizzie, was talking about how difficult it can be to get ready on time when there's a small one. And I on behalf of all of us, want to say appreciation to you that you're here. It's wonderful and amazing. I remember so much when my now quite large people were teeny weeny people, the hours it took us to get out of the house or to be ready for anything, and how little anybody else understood about how difficult that was. Yeah. As always, I'm really pleased to be here. And this source, so this is, I think, to give credit where it is due, it is one of the many poems that we have come across because people who are participants on our year-long professional coaching course, where we have poetry really central, because poetry is such a powerful way of us listening and talking to one another. We have a thing going on our group for sharing things in the year, where people share poetry, and this poem came to us that way. And I have an idea about who it's from, and I'm sure that the person who it's from is listening and with us, and I just want to say thank you for bringing it our way. And I caught it and put it to one side the moment I first saw it. And there'll be more to say about this when we get talking about it, but partly because I think it speaks so powerfully into a sort of misunderstanding that many of us have in our culture, and that I certainly find myself living in easily, unless I pay attention and unless I have practices to remind me, because it's a matter of forgetting, that so much of what is alive and deep and necessary in our lives needs us to do something other than just keep going. And so reading this poem for me is like connecting to a deep, nourishing source, and it's like remembering. So I think it really matters. So that's how come it's here. So I'm going to read it, and I will say to everyone, oh, I know, I just have to find it because it's gone off my screen. To all of you who are listening or who are watching, we always publish our sources on the Turning Towards Life website. So you can come back later if you want to find it, read along with us, share it with other people, anything like that. You can always go to turningtowards.life after the once we've published this on YouTube or on a podcast. But also, this is an invitation for any of you who haven't joined our Facebook group yet. We publish it on our Facebook group on the Friday before the Sunday where we talk about it, and then talk about it. So you can always find it there. And that's where I'm reading it from now. And it's called Fire by Judy Sorum Brown. What makes a fire burn is space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs packed in too tight, can douse the flames almost as certainly as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between as much as to the wood. When we are able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is fuel and the absence of fuel together that make fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way.
It's so beautiful, so evocative. I can feel my imagination coming alive with this lovely metaphor. What makes a fire burn is space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs packed in too tight, can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between as much as to the wood. When we are able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is fuel and absence of the fuel together that make the fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way.
I think this poem is about so many things. So I think it's about creativity, and I think it's about human relationship. And I think it's about how we might live our lives on this planet. And the thought that came to me most strongly when you were reading, Lizzie, was, at least for me, it's easy for me to get stuck at one pole. There's a sort of polarity, which is coming to know my own nature on one end and transcending my own nature at the other end, which is what I think development is, or transcending the way I have been in the world so far, like not just going, well, I am this way. And one of the risks for me has been to go towards the, well, I need to learn new ways to be, and to be self-critical about myself for staying the same. And that the going new ways to be for me has often been in the direction of, which I think is the one that's sort of really valued in our wider culture, of do more powerfully, faster, achieve things, make a dent on the world, all of which have merits to them. But held on their own as if that was the only thing ends up being incredibly poisonous, which is this beautiful point of this poem. It's that the fire and the space are required simultaneously. And I've come to learn of myself that I have a really deep attunement to the spaces. And I notice that in myself, I can dismiss that or think that I'm somehow wrong or off because the space matters, and feel like I ought to fill my time and fill my space and be in control and have things happen and all of those kind of things. And I want to keep on saying, yeah, in the right places, that matters so much. But that it's really easy for me to have, and I suspect for many of us, to have a judgment that one of those matters more than the other, that the other is a mistake, that the space one is the mistake. And on Friday morning, So just a couple of days ago, I had a morning with no plans in, where there were some things that felt important for me to do. And I woke up in the morning with this very strong feeling that I ought to just get up and get going. And as I tried to do that, I could feel how lifeless it was, how much effort I was having to put in. Like in this poem, I was trying to pack all the logs in really tight. And the more I tried to pack things in, the less flame there was in them. And it was like, I mean, imagine trying to get something kindled when it's jammed like this. So I did what I ordinarily do in the morning, which is I went for a swim in the very cold pond, which took quite a while to get there. And then after I'd swum, I had the strongest feeling that what I needed to do was to walk home instead of go home any other way. And it's about an hour and a quarter's walk. And I walked. And about halfway along the walk, I sort of had one of these, like, how could I have forgotten this? Which is that is absolutely vital for everything else. And it was one of those moments of sort of, I'm glad to say it was one of those moments of joyful recognition. Oh, yes, this is my nature too. And as it happens, I came home and sat down and did the work I intended to do, and it was joyful to do and creative, and all because there were spaces, openings in which the flame knew that it could find its way. And that's just one, as I'm talking, I've got so many different examples in my mind of places where this has its form.
Yeah, I'm noticing, reflecting on what you're saying, that the process I've been in has been kind of watching that motor in me that is the non-space oriented person. I get on with stuff, do stuff, go places, be on time, all those things. And in this phase that we're in now, it's possibly the most inappropriate orientation to life I could have. And I think maybe it's why a lot of people struggle in this kind of newborn phase, is because we are so programmed to just get on with stuff. And what's really required is so far anyway, I mean, we're like 3.5 weeks in or something, but so far what's required is so much more space than logs. Like the logs are like feeding, changing a nappy, bouncing around, but mostly the spaciousness is what's allowing us to do the most important thing, which is to bond with one another and to be together and to learn about one another and learn how to be together and what our relationship is. And it seems such a cruelty to feel that part of me that wants to just get on with my life or something. And thankfully I can find that awareness. But even really early on, I was like, I should be able to get out of the house and I should be able to do this. And I could feel the pressure coming in like shoulds of what I should be doing. And then I would remind myself how many days old this little tiny baby is. And I'd go, hold on a second, like how can I be thinking that? But it's like a habitual pace maybe, or a wishfulness to be on it, or to be together, or to be doing something. And I really appreciate this part at the end of this poem, which is that a fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. Like there's something about what's happening in all of our lives that wants to be born, that wants to happen, that's this flame that has its own life. And if we suffocate it with loads of logs, it doesn't get to be itself. And I feel like that's such a strong metaphor for the whole of life, and particularly also where I find myself now. And maybe there are other mums listening too, and dads and people looking after children who can recognize that there's a self that's wishing to flourish. And if we cram into the space everything that we can think of, maybe as an act of, I can feel it in myself, of, you know, avoidance of certain things, we don't really allow the flame that's wanting to burn as itself. We're kind of interfering too much. And so I feel like this is a very beautiful invitation to deepening the contact with the space, so that I can be allowing of what wants to be here rather than trying to shape it too much. And it's funny because I feel like I'm doing my best to practice this. And somebody came around the other day to visit us and said, oh, you know, how many hours sleep are you getting? Is the baby getting? And how many times a day? And I said, I've got absolutely no idea. I said, I can tell you that we went to bed and that there was kerfuffling around, but I've got no idea. I don't look at my watch. I'm not timing anything. I'm not trying to be on a schedule. I'm just following, really. And I feel nourished, and I feel loving, and I feel like what's wanting to be born is being born in the space, because I'm not putting a load of demands on it. And somehow I think we've spoken about this before, Justin, this paradox of like, the harder you try, the worse it gets. It feels like this is a completely developmental space, becoming a mum, which is, if I tense up, try hard, become anxious, try and make it all okay, it very quickly descends into something that's just completely unenjoyable. And if I loosen and pay attention to the spaciousness and the moments where absolutely nothing is happening apart from us staring at each other, or me and Matthew with Vesper in between us looking at her and wondering how she changed from one day to the next or something, that the whole experience is hugely enjoyable. And I can feel the dance between the tension and the freedom that's possible, because when we allow there to be space, it just feels like everything relaxes, like the nervous system's put some stuff down, and it's a really different thing. And the flame that's here, that's wanting to burn, gets to have a life that it is intended for itself. And it doesn't feel like we're all kind of enmeshed. It just feels like we're letting each other breathe or something.
That's the beauty of this poem, is that if you think about it as trying to kindle a fire with a pile of logs, it's just incredibly obvious that you'll never get it started if it's all packed in with logs. We know that about fires, but we don't know that about other things often. Mm-hmm. And I can feel, as you're talking about this, that this move that we make, which is a kind of, I think you said contraction, it's a kind of contraction away from life itself, that the thing that fills the spaces is life. And life is quite able to fill spaces if we'll make them. But we very, very easily get, and it may be particular to our times, and it may be being heightened by our times, whether or not it is, it's here, that the ordinary state that so many of us walk around in is a state of contracted anxiety. We feel a sort of fear about not being in control of things, or what might happen to us if we weren't on top of things, in control of things all the time. And then we contract, and in our contraction away from life, we want to fill all the spaces and smother everything. And it's, I agree with you that it's a kind of fear, but I also think for many of us, we do it out of a sense of love. We think that if I'm on it all, if I fill it all, then I'll be taken care of myself, other people, life, whatever it is. So it's a sort of fear-fueled way of trying to exercise care that we have. And like you say, in those moments where we can breathe out as well, because this is like breathing in without breathing out, which I think we've talked about before. And we can do simple things like look into the eyes of another, or feel something, or allow ourselves to discover and be in contact with something we've never felt before, or be bored for a while, or be outside and feel and take in what's around us. All of these are moves where life can start to burn in the spaces, burn in a live way in the spaces. And I couldn't help but thinking whilst you were talking is that, of course, the name of this endeavour that we're both part of that gives birth to this, the Thirdspace, is really a name for the spaces in between where something happens just because life is there. In a way, this poem is speaking right into the heart of what we've got ourselves dedicated to. Mm. I had the most beautiful conversation this week with someone who told me that she had discovered that she'd been trying to have things happen around her all the time, all her life, by exerting great force, and that had been a great act of love, and she'd been doing it for years and years and years at home and in her work, and in some ways it had made a lot of things happen, but in other ways life had become exactly like described in this poem, like jammed, like so jammed, everything so jammed together that nothing could move, including herself. And she said that she'd been practicing letting there be spaces and not being on top of everything. And then she said the most beautiful thing. She said, you know what? She said, for the first time in my life, people are coming to me with things, instead of me always going to other people and having things happen. And she said, I could never have imagined that this would happen, and that what people came to me with were their way of taking care of things as well. And I'm learning, she said, to let other people take care of things too, and everything is different because of that. Mm. And it seems to me that this is another angle on this. It's not just that we make space in which we can have a certain kind of attentiveness and openness and receptiveness. It's also that life can fill those spaces in a myriad ways, including how other people get to show up, how other people get to express themselves, and how we can get met when we're not, frantic, reaching into the world all the time. So moving to hear her say this and to see that another kind of life was possible, not from her giving up, but from her relaxing enough. Yeah, it makes me think of the kind of crucible that motherhood is, because you have immediate feedback. Like if I'm tense and wanting something to happen, I get immediate feedback, versus if I'm allowing and soft, I get a different kind of feedback. It's such an immediate thing. And of course, the relationship part of all of this is it's such a great place to look to see how we're being, like wondering about how people are able to relate to us and what we're doing that enables that relating or not relating, or however people are being with us, as a source of self-reflection. Because I think sometimes I think of self-reflection as just me, but of course the self isn't just this, it's everything. And if I reflect on the way that people are being with me, and maybe even ask people what it's like to be with me, there's a whole, just like you're saying, there's a whole source of the way life turns out in any moment, a whole source of information about that
that comes from the way that people are allowed, are afforded opportunities to be with us, to interact with us, and whether they, as your friend was saying, come of their own energy, their own will, versus when we're chasing after them. It's such a curious thing, this development thing, isn't it? So mysterious. It's like, how is it that letting go of something brings it close, and how is it that hanging on to something pushes it away? Like, it's really bonkers, and it never fails to kind of shock me, the kind of paradoxical nature of the way life is, and how come it is like that. Like, it really holds me, the inquiry about what is it about being human that lends itself to the paradoxical nature of being. And it's such a weird thing. Like, the harder I try, the more elusive it becomes. It's like really annoying as well. It's so unlinear, and loosening our grip on everything brings such a freedom that we were always trying to get, like you say, out of love in the first place. Like, the only reason I would be tense around Vesper feeding, for example, is because I love her.
Right.
Like, I wouldn't be doing it if it didn't come from love. But it's not the way that life works. So I have to find a way to regulate myself and know a bit more about the nature of life itself, so that I can live well, and not always just follow my undiagnosed, distorted loveness. It's like it's always coming from love, and that's why love and fear feel so like close together, like two sides of the same coin, because I know that so much of my fear is just a very small step away from how much I love. And that's why it's so tricky, because it's never not love. And therefore, to make a distinction between the way I'm distorting things and my good intention, and then finding a way forward that's not the distortion, but that's still born of my good intention, and finding a different way of being in something. Like, for me, that's the kind of, I guess, the elixir of life, and how come life is compelling and interesting and elusive and mysterious. And this invitation to space and spaciousness feels like a kind of an opening that gives us a chance to even make those inquiries, just to stop what we're doing, stop packing the fire. It made me think what it was like. It's like me just getting one of the massive bags of logs and just shoving that on the fire and then lighting the bag. It's like, it's not going to light. I've got to do something with the logs. I've got to arrange them. I've got to be conscious about the logs, so that I can create space. And then, in that consciousness of the way we're arranging things, we can check that there's space, and we can see that there's a log here and a log there. And when I burn it this time, the flame didn't burn very brightly, and next time I could arrange them a little bit differently with a little more space or something. So I feel like this metaphor's got so many distinctions in it, so many ways of thinking about our lives. It's really, it feels really beautiful to hold this, and let it also let this keep burning as itself in our lives too. And holding this for the day, the week, however long we remember this, just to see, how am I arranging the fire of my life?
I want to, before we end, respond to something that you said that was so brilliant, and which was this paradox, the apparent paradox that we let go and we get met by something. How can that be? And I think maybe one thing that's worth saying about it is, of course, if you look at someone like Vesper, who right now is completely dependent upon everyone around her, as she grows, as we all grow, we need to find out that we can move the world. Like, we'll never make a fire until we learn to put logs in the fireplace. So we have to find out, when I act in the world, things can happen. But the mistake that we make is to forget that existence itself is kind of alive. So we imagine there's a sort of egotistical, if that's the right way, or ego-centered way of imagining that because I can make things happen, and because I'm vulnerable if I don't, that must mean that it's all down to me. And when we imagine that it's all down to me, of course we get afraid, because we imagine that if we stop, if we let go at all, we'll be finished, we'll be done for. This is exactly why fear and love, as you said it so beautifully, is so close together. But existence isn't like that, because we're not separate from it. It's not like I'm a separate thing and walled off from the rest of life that is kind of dead. We're right in the middle of, we're participating in an alive, fully alive thing. So, which is really hard to see. But one of the places we get to see it is when we start to let ourselves take a breath for the first time, when we start to let ourselves have space. And then if we pay attention, we can see that life is coming in as well. Mm-hmm. But it's paradoxical, I think, mostly because it runs at odds with the way that we see ourselves.
Yeah.
The separateness of our bodies. And so it's hard to learn, but absolutely vital to learn if we want to be up to anything that is love, not distorted by fear.
Yeah.
Mm. So I know it's time for us to end. So I want to say, Lizzie, thank you. And thank you to all of you who've been with us this morning live. And to the many of you who I know are going to listen on our podcast on YouTube, find us on turningtowards.life. And just a reminder that we're running programs and teaching stuff all year as well. So you can find out all of those at wearethirdSpace.org. But mostly thank you to you, Lizzie, for doing this with me.
Thank you, Justin. We'll see you all next week.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.